start the conversation. So, as you know, this webinar series is a series that celebrates research of experts of the countries they represent. And it is our way of celebrating research-informed practice and research in general. And we're trying to, and we are, I think through this webinar series, we are hoping to get insider perspectives on the incredible work that's being done by our colleagues in their respective countries. And so the topic of today's webinar is on pre-service and in-service teachers' critical reflections on the experiences that have shaped their identities as EFL teachers. And we have actually three individuals with us who have done incredible work in the area. And the first one, I'm just going to do introductions, everyone. The first one is Professor Roy Gamboa Mena, who's the chair of the Department of Philosophy, Arts and Letters, and also a faculty member at the English Teaching Majors Department at the University of Costa Rica, Sede de Occidente. The second, Hania, who will be joining us shortly when she can, is also an EFL teacher of 29 years. And the third is Natalia Ramirez Casalvolone, who has 10 years of EFL teaching experience. Both Hania and Natalia are also faculty members at the University of Costa Rica in San Ramon. And Natalia is also a doctoral student here at Indiana University. So I want to welcome all three of you, and Hania will eventually make it through to us, as her connection is probably not the best right now, but she's going to try and make it. And so Professor Gamboa, we're going to start with you. If you could unmute yourself, that would be great. So fantastic. And so one of the things that we would like to talk about is the research that you're doing. And the research is looking at the critical incidences and the reflections of these teachers on the experiences that have impacted their identities. And so, but one of the things about that research that you did and that our members have had a chance to look at is the humanism approach. And can you talk a little bit as to what that means in teacher education in Costa Rica? We notice also that the Ministry of Public Education or in Costa Rica also has humanism as one of its three philosophies in teacher education. Could you explain that a little bit to us for those of us who are not familiar with that approach or Costa Rican teacher education in general?
Yes, thank you, Dr. Pawan. Thank you for the nice introduction, and thank you for having me here and share this conversation with my colleagues from different places in the world, as I understand, that are joining us through the webinar, but also Facebook. So thank you for having me. Absolutely, yeah. Humanism is one of the philosophical sources that inform our major at the University of Costa Rica and in general the whole university. And as you mentioned, also the Ministry of Education embraces humanism as an epistemological source for their curriculum. Now, I think that's important to make a distinction between classic humanism and then 20th century humanism as we understand it and embrace it in our community. If you hear thundering, we're in the middle of a heavy storm, so I hope I don't get disconnected. But anyways, that's going to be part of the background. Anyways, you see, classic humanism goes more along with the line of scholar academic curriculum, more where knowledge is seen as a cognitive construct, and the role of the teacher is defined more as that of somebody who bestows knowledge upon empty recipients who are the students, all right? But that's not the type of humanism that we embrace. The type of humanism that we embrace in our major is humanism as resulting from other fields like psychology and so on, where there is more emphasis on the affective domain of the learner. And that goes more along with
more along the lines of probably the storm has hit. Natalia, you want to take that up? But one of the things about humanism is the idea of affective, the focus on affective learning, the focus on the feelings, on nurturing learners' feelings and going about it through who they are as individuals. And I think Roy is coming back. The storm in Costa Rica is really huge. You want to continue that, Natalia, as to explaining that's coming from Costa Rica?
Yeah, I can take over just a second before Roy joins us again. Okay. I think Roy is back. I don't want to. Roy, are you back?
Go ahead whenever you can join us, but go ahead and
Okay.
talk.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so what
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay.
We were talking about humanism.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah. Go ahead, Roy.
Yeah. So, anyways, I was stating that the type of humanism that we embrace in our major, in our university, and the one that the Ministry of Education is also embracing, and the one that we talk about in our piece of research. And when I say our piece of research is because this research was conducted by a colleague of mine, Henry Sevilla, and I. Henry Sevilla is another professor in our major. Is then that one that looks at the individual from the perspective of a person, right? And puts him at the center of the learning process. So basically that is what I, roughly speaking, would share with you about humanism as being a source of inspiration under which this study was conducted.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's an interesting approach because, I think it's putting the person in the center rather than content knowledge, which is a really interesting twist. Not twist, is something that we all aspire to kind of focus on the teachers as individuals rather than what they should know about, the content knowledge about teaching English. How, since I have you and how is that, how is this, how is this manifested in your teacher education program? What do you do before we get into the research? Hania is going to join us, but the storm is in her way. But how do you manifest that in your coursework? Can you hear me? Natalia, you want to take that? How do you manifest that in your coursework?
Well, I think that one of the important things to take into consideration here is that we have the idea of the student as
Go ahead, Natalia. Yes, I think
as well, we see the student as an integral being who is affected by previous experiences, lived experience. And as Roy mentions in his research, students come with a background during their years of learning before going into the classroom as teachers. And this is part of their construction of identity. It's something that cannot be separated from who they become as they construct themselves as teachers. So
the question is, sorry to interrupt, but the question is, since Roy is back online, Roy, are you there? So Roy, again, storms in Costa Rica every afternoon is a typical day in Costa Rica with heavy storms. And so right now they're having heavy downpours. If you teach in Costa Rica, this is the experience, the wonderful experience. But Roy, if you cannot catch up, the question that I have is, how is this manifested in the classroom? How is it manifested in a teacher education program? The affective element of this, of the focus on teacher education. Well, how does it become part of your curriculum? Natalia?
Okay, so I think that students are given the opportunity of going back in different moments of their life to reflect on what has gone how their learning of English in this case has been affecting who they are in the present time. So
Right.
through different types of exercises where they reflect on what went on during their previous years of experience learning the new language, they take into consideration how the importance of English, for example, for each of them in their lives, their aims and why they want to learn English, and what is the importance of the language in their lives. So this is part of what goes on in our classrooms.
Okay.
I think
So
Roy is back.
Roy, are you there?
No.
Okay, so then we'll just go to the next question, which is, the critical incidents that he had used in his research, and he'll be coming back on. But in terms of the critical incidents that he had used, and so there's several of the things that are challenging for us, and one of them is the findings. There are 3 findings in the research. One of them is, Roy, please come on in. There are 3 findings from the research. One is that there are 3 types of findings: positive, negative, and contextual context that affect their identity as teachers. Roy, if you want to talk, can you come in now, Roy? Okay, Roy, if not, well, the connections are really bad, and so
Yes.
we do apologize. Roy, if you might. Okay. Come on in when you can, Roy. So we'll just go ahead. Natalia, I'm going to kind of focus on you. As soon as we can, Roy can come in, then.
Yeah,
then,
so in Roy talked about negative effects of their, like how their experience during their learning of the language, their negative experiences made a big impact on how they were learning English at the moment. But it was in a different situation, because now they were becoming English teachers, or they were learning English to become English teachers. But many of them make reference to their experiences during their high school education, and many of them also about their negative experiences during their taking courses as part of the major. So some of them expressed how having these negative experiences were a limitation in their development of the language, and at some points they expressed how they were nervous about speaking in front of other classmates. They were nervous about the teachers' reactions towards their possible mistakes in pronunciation, in grammar structures. And then they reflected on how that was going to affect them later when they were the ones being the teachers in the classroom. Some of them didn't know if they were going to repeat consciously or unconsciously the same behaviors their teachers had with them, or if they were more into the idea of, no, this is something that affected me, so I will prevent or try not to make those same mistakes. Because some of them, and if you get to read the article, you will see how the students are, express teachers being rude to them, having negative feedback, making them feel uncomfortable and in a very disadvantaged position while the classroom was happening, or the class was going on. So that was the negative effect that they can talk about. Then they had also positive feedback coming in, and that's when the teachers would give them very good feedback that it made them feel secure, it made them feel encouraged to learn the language, it made an effect in the motivation part. So I don't know, I think Roy, can you maybe go over the third element that you found out in your research?
Okay, so it so seems that I'm back now. I hope it's ceased a little, and we hope we have a more stable connection from here on. And I think that, well, I think Natalia has done a very good job into introducing elements that we found through our research. And I think that the third thing that was interesting about this research is that in trying to figure out what the sources of critical incidents that cause and that shape learners' configuration of their not only identities, not only as language learners but also as future teachers, has to do with context as a source of struggle. And when we talk about context, is what are the incidents that resulted into turning point experiences that were produced by the context. For example, the context should be understood as that which is not the teacher directly or the learner himself, the one causing the incident, but rather things such as, for example, methodology or strategies used by the teacher or professor in this case in the class. Another example could be, administrative related issues. This is something we didn't discuss much in the article, but that's another example of a context bound source that could produce critical incidents.
Right.
As you could see in the article, we talked a little bit about, and we offer a few examples for some of the learners that discussed methodologies, for example, or assessment that were cases that made them think about a different route for learning, or that either motivated them or demotivated them as learners in this case. Another source could be the partners, peers in the classroom, and the way they support or not the learning process. And this could be sources of either motivation or demotivation. They could become a turning point. We've had learners abandon the major because they felt either intimidated or not supported by their peers and so on. So these are a few examples of how the context also plays an important role in shaping the identity of students.
So you have three things here that shape identities vis-a-vis the article, the research findings. Sorry to interrupt, but I just wanted to recap because you have so many ideas at this point that emerge from your research. One is that negative reinforcement from the teachers affect their sense of who they are as teachers. Positive reinforcement affect the teachers as well in terms of whether or not they want to stay. And then in terms of context, the methods used in the teacher training approaches, the sense of the teachers of themselves and their abilities also affect their identity as teachers in practice. And so this is what you were talking about that you uncovered in your research, if I'm correct. And so, but one of the most surprising things that I saw in those findings is how the teachers viewed the use of Spanish in the classroom as also affecting them as English language teachers, meaning the use of Spanish by teacher educators in the classroom also impact them and their own identity as English language teachers as part of the context factors. Could you explain that a little bit?
Oh, absolutely. And this is also very interesting because you have to understand that we're in an EFL context where learners of English usually, the only source or the main source of input in English and contact with English and opportunity to use the English language is the classroom. And so for students in our program who are going to be teachers, having access to good source of input in English is really important. And when they have teachers or professors that rely a lot on Spanish as an instructional means, then these students feel usually demotivated or their expectations are not fulfilled. And so that's why it was an important finding there. And the, you know, the one thing that we thought was interesting is how this has an impact in, you know, the shaping of their identity, both as learners and also as future teachers. Many of them actually reported not wanted to sign up for classes with certain teachers that would rely a lot on DL1. But this needs to be taken with a bit of caution too, because there are still other students that was not in the study, but through my experience with students, there are others that do need a bit of L1 in their classrooms as well. So,
yeah, I think it would be a really interesting subject of discussion because there's several thoughts about the use of L1 in teaching English. And I think this would be a great follow-up in terms of discussion. For those of you who've joined us, the first half hour that we're talking about the research that Professor Roy Gamboa Mena has done with his colleague Hania Morales. And the second half of this webinar will be the Q&A, and we'll take your questions, but continue to post them. Also joining us at this point is Hania Morales, and she is a teacher, with 29 years of experience as an EFL teacher, both at the Colegio Diurno as well as the Colegio Nocturno. And so Hania, thank you for joining us. Thank you for going through the storms to get to us. And so you have yes, you've read, and you've read Roy's research, and you've lived the experiences with your students. What are some of your thoughts about his findings in terms of teaching EFL in the college classroom? Some of these findings about negative, positive, and contextual issues that impact who you are as a teacher of English and your conception of who you are and that of your colleagues. Hania?
Well, first of all, I would like to thank you for having this opportunity of sharing with you this afternoon. Well, I got some problems with the storm, but everything is all right now. Well, as I read this article, it was very interesting because I made like a self-reflection on my 20 years of experience, and I asked myself if I had been the protagonist, the negative protagonist of some of these bad experiences for some of my students. And I'm still on it, but I'm checking and I'm thinking that I'm not being so cruel, I would say.
I think you're one of the most compassionate teachers I've observed in my time in Costa Rica. And so definitely you are a very compassionate teacher.
Thank you. I hope so. I hope so. But I was thinking about how these bad experiences these students had, where at the end, they helped them. Okay? They helped them because they grew as people. They are better learners now, and they are better teachers now because they experienced in their own blood, let's say, these negative experiences. So I think now they are going to do everything to try to avoid these bad things to happen in their students.
Mm-hmm. So what shaped you the most, Hania, as a teacher in your teacher education program? What shaped you the most as a teacher?
Well, let me go back to one of the things that I read in the article that really, I don't know, made me think deeper. And it's what participant 21 said or wrote. She said, I learned that teachers have the power to motivate or discourage, to give you inspiration or take it away.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, this is a very deep thought. It's simple, but deep. And I think the one that has shocked me the most in the school has been the bad experiences or the hard situations my students face every day to come to my school. And if I know what these situations are for one of those, even for one of those students that I have in front of me, I will, that makes me do the best for them.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I think you're connecting with your students. I mean, I think what you're saying is that as an empathetic teacher, you're kind of observing your students and seeing how all that it took them to get to your classroom. Tell us a little bit before you go on, Hania, what is the Colegio Nocturno? That's a very unique concept in Costa Rica. What is it?
Is. Well, a Colegio Nocturno is defined as a regular Costa Rican public high school, but it has certain characteristics that make it unique, as you said before.
Mm-hmm.
It is ruled by the Ministry of Education, as MEP, as we called it in Spanish, but it has these characteristics that I would say that I would divide into three. The most obvious one is that it's a schedule. Most high schools and active schools in Costa Rica work from 7 a.m. to 4 or 5 p.m. But in the case of Colegio Nocturnos, we worked from 6 to 10 p.m. At night.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
We teach the basic subjects. The curriculum is limited. We only teach, well, students only get or take Spanish, English, social studies, science, and some other curriculum that it is called socio-laboral, that is related also to English.
Mm-hmm.
But the biggest and most relevant difference I would say that these schools have, or this high school have, is the type of student that we have, the profile of the students that we have. I would say that Colegio Nocturnos were inspired since the very beginning by the philosophy of humanism, because they were generated in 1951 for those students or those people who needed to finish their studies, but they needed to work during the mornings and in the afternoons too.
Right, right. And so this is the unique part about Colegio Nocturno. You have students, it's not a different night school, it is a high school system, but these students have worked all day. The socioeconomic situation is very, very tough for them, but they make the time to go to school. And the teachers in Costa Rica sometimes teach during the day and at night as well, just as you are, Hania. And so this is a very special, unique characteristic of public education in Costa Rica, which I think is a very compassionate one. You try to make it accessible to everyone. And so I think continuing with that, Hania, if I may ask Roy another question, which is, Roy, in working with these teachers, the pre-service teachers, and getting them ready into a system that has both day school and night school. This is something that teacher educators have to kind of prepare themselves for. And I noticed that you use critical incidents in your approach toward teacher education. And one of the things that you said about in your research about using critical incidents is that you're trying to reach them in a compassionate way. Critical incidents are not dramatic incidents, or they're not conflicting and challenging incidents. However, just the word critical incidents to me say that it is a very challenging approach to teacher education. How would you address that, Roy?
Yeah, it's just that probably the term critical and incident, evoke challenging times or hard times or difficult times, but one needs not to be confused or misled by the term. Critical incident doesn't necessarily mean negative. And, you know, for those who had the chance to read the article, might have found out that some of the incidents reported are not in the negative. As a matter of fact, you know, I hope that most of the critical incidents, you know, experienced by our students are positive. A critical incident might be just a typical incident, you know, something that you experience through learning. But what makes it critical is the analysis that you make of them. That is, you actually problematize it by analyzing it and reflecting about how this has had a say or has a say in the configuration of the type of professional I'm going to be. And you can problematize not only negative experiences, but also positive ones. And those could lead to insights that are important in helping you make choices about the type of teacher you're going to be and the circumstances under which you're going to work and how you're going to deal with them and how you prepare to deal with them.
So how would you set this up? I mean, I think this is part of your, I think what's really interesting is your focus on their autobiography of being a teacher. I mean, I think that's the thing that stood out in terms of your approach in this particular, you know, in this particular setting, that you use their autobiography as a process of teaching, you know, as a means of teacher education, which is very interesting. Natalia, you want to add to that since you've been a teacher in this system, or you have other questions for Roy or Hania?
I actually wanted to highlight Hania's experience in the Colegio Nocturno. I was a teacher there for 10 years, and I know that as teachers, we live a lot of critical incidents in this school. So I was wondering if Hania can expand a little bit on that, on critical incidents that she has lived in her time at the Nocturno that have helped her shape her identity as an EFL teacher.
Thank you, Natalia. Well, there have been many, but I would like to point out some of them. As I told you before, our population is it's the most vulnerable in the country. Some of these girls and boys and men and women are people who make big efforts, enormous, gigantic efforts to attend the school, to continue studying. The majority of them come to school after long shifts of work. They take care of their children, they take care of their parents or some other people who pay them to work for them. And also they have lived tremendous bad experiences in their lives. But the thing that makes me more critical about this is that even though they have lived these bad experiences, even though they have worked hard during the day, they come to school with a smile and they greet you and they treat you kind. And then you see their faces when they can do something. So we always try to appreciate or to promote those small little things that they do. Every single thing they do is very appreciated. And we also try to, as this population is so poor, they have very bad economic situations, we try to, I mean, when I say we, is the government in general, the Ministry of Education has made them available free transportation from their homes to the high school and vice versa. And they also get hot, fresh dinner at night for free, because nobody who has his stomach empty can think or study. So we make sure of that. And I have had many students who work not only during the day, but at night after they leave school, our school at 10 p.m., they go and take a shift from 11 to 7 in the morning. So they sleep a little while during the day, and then they take time to do homeworks and do what they have to do and study, and then they come to our school again. And they're not so, they're a lot. They're a lot, they're not few people.
They do quite a bit. They do quite a bit to be in school. It's very challenging, and I think you're describing that pretty well, Hania. And going back to that, to the teacher education front, Roy, as you do this research, Roy, given that that's the population, the students, your student teachers are, and the teachers you train are going to be in. What are, when you bring English into the discussion, what do they see? Why, in terms of the autobiographies that they've produced, what do they see the role of English language teachers? What do they see the role, why is it so important to pursue English given all the challenges that they have? There are other immediate needs, but English seems to be something that, that the students are pursuing regardless.
Yeah, I think that's an important thing to think about. When you're faced with so many challenges in life and still struggle to continue learning, especially English, is because you certainly believe that there is something good that could derive from this. And in the case of students, both, like the students in high school that Hania works, all the students in our country and the students in our major, their idea is that through this, they will shape a better type of life in the future. They will, step out of the hardship they're in right now and have an opportunity to grow as people, both economically, professionally, but also as people. I know you've read some of you're familiar with some of the English language teaching policy in our country. And, it has been very, very, very much promoted in the past few years. And with the current government, the promotion of the learning of English amongst our population has become a big issue. So much so that there are high expectations for a great number of our people to use the language productively within the next few years.
I know President Alvarado has, has a new decree in that by the year 2022, he is hoping that 180,000 students are proficient in English, and thus the preparation of teachers, has to be targeted toward that direction. There's a sense of urgency here for teacher educators in terms of that mandate. Is there not? Is there something that's happening as a consequence of that mandate? Have things changed methodologically, or can humanism still play a role given that mandate?
Well, absolutely, absolutely. As a matter of fact, this is not a coincidence, and I think this goes very well, or is very coherent with Costa Rican history. Ever since the country was very young, efforts have been made to promote education as a vehicle that could take us, out of poverty, out of need, to advance the country economically and productively. And nowadays, English seems to be an area where, English together with technology, right? And are two areas that are being promoted, the most recent policy by the government. And this brings us, like in the case of the University of Costa Rica, to have played an important role as well in making these things possible. The University of Costa Rica in our program has had a long tradition of working towards helping the government attain these goals. To give you a few examples, our students in the major of teaching of English do their practicum, their teaching practicum at public schools of the Ministry of Education. They do their research for graduation. Our students in the licenciatura stage of the program need to conduct research as part of the requirements for graduation. And they do their research in the public schools. They research topics that, you know, are important, and usually, you know, the line of research they use is mostly on you know, apply research in the classrooms, and they try to help solve, you know, problems in the classrooms through their research. But there are other initiatives that the university has. For example, right now, we're working together with the Ministry of Education in the putting together of a plan to explicitly teach pronunciation in high schools. As a matter of fact, there is a team from the campus, you know, part of our faculty, that started working about 2 years ago on this. And there are a number of other initiatives. But yeah, there is a lot to be done here. There is a lot that the University of Costa Rica has cooperated with. And there is a lot of hope that by helping our population become literate in English, they will find a way out of more limited economical circumstances.
I wanted to add, do we still have time, Dr. Pawan? I wanted to add something.
Go ahead.
So you were saying about if humanism is still plays a role in this situation that, or that the alliance that President Alvarado is thinking about or has aimed the country towards. And I think that now more than ever, we can see how the University of Costa Rica and the MEP are working together as they inform each other about how the society and the students and the young adults are changing, what differences, what are their aims nowadays in order to answer what the country needs. So the university has supported the MEP in different ways, giving ongoing professional training to the MEP teachers since, I'm guessing since the 90s. Then there was a big training program from the UCR professors to the teachers. I actually participated in those programs while I was the teacher at the Nocturno, where they were giving us ongoing professional development in order to keep the training going, and also so we could keep updated in regards to the necessities of the population that was growing.
Right. I think one of the things that's special, I think that I think is really interesting, is that you have public school teachers in UCR and vice versa. So the faculty in UCR, at least in San Ramon, where I saw it, are also public school teachers, which is sort of an interesting way of making that connection. With a few minutes that we have here, we have about 18 minutes. So let's open this up to questions and answers. And I think there's one from Karen, who is asking about the reproductive nature of teaching. I guess if Karen is there, she could join in, but one of the things, I guess the question is, how can you disrupt, I guess, how can teachers or teacher educators disrupt? Karen, you want to join in and ask your question?
Hi there, thank you. This has been very interesting. I've done some research as well in this area, so I've really enjoyed hearing about the Costa Rican perspective. And I'm also a teacher educator and a TESOL program. So it's something I've looked at, that that student teachers teach the way they were taught, and to disrupt that, even as bringing awareness to that, and as good intentioned as they are to do things better, it's still a struggle. It's still a struggle. And particularly, I think when there's tensions, student teachers, I find they retreat back to what's most familiar. And so I'm just wondering if you've got some great ideas or had some experiences with seeing that disruption of really embracing and doing things differently.
Roy or Hania? Yeah, go ahead, Roy.
Yeah, I'll take that and share some of my thoughts on this. One of the reasons why my colleague Henry and I underwent this, endeavor, this research endeavor, was that we strongly believe in reflection, whether it is, writing or whatever means, but reflection is really important in shaping your identity as a professional. Our hope was that we could help learners learn how to reflect and make sense out of what we call critical incidents, so that once they step in the professional world, they continue to think about what happens to them, what happens in their classrooms, what experiences they live through, and can reflect upon them. So this disruption of, this vicious circle that I teach the way I was taught, and so if punishment was important and played a role in the classroom where I learned, then I'm going to use punishment, and so on and so forth. This could be straightened up or cut or stopped only through reflection. If professionals do not know how to reflect about their professional practice on a regular basis, and if they don't know how to make sense of whatever happens, and if they are not equipped with this reflective habits and the know-how of reflection, then it's very hard that we can disrupt this vicious circle. I don't know if that gives some perspective to the conversation here, but this is at least our belief.
Yeah, I think linked to what Roy is saying is also the concept of communities of practice, which we can highlight right now. Also taking into account the fact of technology, I see nowadays that there are a lot of, at least in my context, Costa Rica, a lot of groups of teachers online on Facebook who are doing reflection consciously or unconsciously. They are there talking about their experiences where other people and other professionals respond to them. So I think this is also one way that that this can disrupt the nature of teaching, or the repetition of bad practices and repetition of bad experiences.
Karen, Karen, did you also teach in Costa Rica? Did you have experience teaching there as well?
No, I don't. No, I'm in Canada, and I've done some teacher education in Mexico and Chile, but not Costa Rica.
Yeah. How is this, I think to all of you, how is this different in terms of, we have a similar situation here as well in terms of disrupting, or in terms of having students look closely as to who they are as individuals and taking ownership of that. It's really tough work for us as teacher educators. And now for Hania, for instance, Hania, you're in the classroom, Hania. And how do you, I think the last time we talked, you were in the classroom and you were very much involved in their lives. And to me, that's sort of an interesting way of teaching. You are right in there with them in their classrooms, and then you follow that through going into their homes. This is very difficult for many teachers to do, but you're doing it, and you teach both night and day, Hania. How do you manage that? Why do you do that? What are you trying to change? What are you trying to, in terms of your teaching approach by doing that?
Well, I think we have the responsibility to cultivate their minds, because as they are people who are facing very hard situations. So we have to struggle every single night to teach our subjects, to teach them English, but in the most organized way, so they can have, well, these cognitive targets that we have are developed or have to be developed. But the most important is to treat each student as a person, as a human being.
Mm-hmm.
And you cannot do that if you don't know them. Mm-hmm. Okay, so you have to know them to see what their needs are. But the most important, and I think the most difficult part to know from them, is their skills. Mm-hmm. And most of these people, I have noticed most of these people have plenty soft skills that they have learned through life.
Mm-hmm.
So that's an important resource that we can have. All of these things that they have learned outside the classroom, teaching, I mean, taking care of people, taking care of the children, looking for a job.
Yeah.
So we can take those resources and take them to the classroom and take advantage of them, so we can refine, we can boost those skills and stimulate so they refine, and also to share those skills with other students.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, I think one of the things I just want to comment as an outsider to what I see in Costa Rica is that, you know, you guys have a very strong, everybody knows everybody in your town, and everybody knows the teachers and the students' families, which is, I think, very unique. I know in your context, everybody knows everybody. And so I think this is one of the things that links back to Roy's research on humanism. You use that knowledge, you know, as part of teacher education, which I think is very unique to Costa Rica. I see another question coming up. Hazel, along the lines of Karen's questions, what are the challenges of implementing this type of reflection? Roy, that's your question. That's a question for you.
Yeah, thank you. I'll take it. Yeah.
Although Faridah, if I may, I'd like to know if Hania is doing something like that and how she is implementing any type of reflection with the high school students as well.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I'll first of all, hello Hazel, nice seeing you here in the meeting. I know Hazel.
And, we know each other. We know each other. This is just what Faridah just said. We know each other.
Yes. Yeah. Anyways, yeah, I think the biggest challenge was for these pre-service teachers to come to the idea that they could reflect upon these critical incidents, problematize them, and make sense out of them in a productive way. And so the challenge here was having them, deploy reflective skills and develop reflective skills in approaching this as learning opportunities that could inform their choices as future teachers. So basically, that I think it's hard for people to look at things and whether they're good or bad, experiences where they're good or bad, and try and make sense out of them in a way such that they could come out with productive results from those that could, enlighten their way towards their professional lives.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. All right. Yeah, it's not easy to reflect. It's not easy. I mean, I think it's not easy to engage in this. Hazel, do you have another question as a follow-up to that? Or, I mean, it's the scaffolding, I would say, is necessary to engage teachers in reflection. And I think some of the things that we try here is that we start with ourselves first. And one of the things is that we showcase our reflection as to who we are. And that's one of the ways that we scaffold the reflections, because it's hard to ask somebody to reflect or to write an autobiography, because they'll say, what are we supposed to do? What are we supposed to reflect on? And so, you, as a teacher educator, starting with us is something that we try to do here, which is, if you want students to reflect, you have to start with your reflections first. How do you scaffold that? What are the ways that you scaffold in terms of doing the reflections, engaging teachers to produce those autobiographies? Because they're not easy, they're very personal. Roy?
Yeah, yes, absolutely. And together with that, I think that one thing that's important here is, it doesn't stop right there. It doesn't stop with me identifying a critical incident, reflecting about it, making sense out of it, and then letting it go. And it doesn't stop with going to college, learn to do this, graduate, go into practice, start working, and then that's it. No, professional identity is shaped by these mostly reshaped. You know, every semester, every term, every time you teach a new group, there are so many different experiences that have a say in the way you make your choices in the classroom. And this is, I would say, one of the most interesting and you know, things about the teaching profession. You need to reinvent yourself, and that reinventing yourself is always reshaping who you are as a professional. And for people like Hania and me and some of my colleagues here who have taught for years and years, if you look back at the early years when you first started teaching, you are totally a different professional now. And you're different from the semester before because you've developed the ability to reshape and reinvent yourself. And so this processes of reflecting about you, about what happens to you, about what has a say in who you are precisely what takes you through the evolution that a teacher undergoes in his professional life.
If I may, Roy, I'm going to take a contrary point of view here, in a sense that just because I read something about it, one of the things that people have said about this humanistic approach is that as teacher educators, you know, you take the approach of a therapist. And why, you know, I mean, or a counselor. Is that your role as a teacher educator? Can you, you know, is that a legitimate role for you to play? Roy?
Well, you know, teachers take on a lot of roles, you know, counselor, psychologist, parent, police officer, whatever, you know, we have so many hats and we take them on all the time.
Yes.
What is important about humanism is that humanism is not a teaching approach. It's not a methodology under which you teach, but is more an epistemology, is more a way you shape your curriculum, and it's a way to approach it, right? And it doesn't mean that you have to you know, babysit or, you know, become the savior of your students. It only means that you have to do teaching that's informed by principles that see the student as the center of the learning process, and that defines your role as a teacher in the learning community. And you have to be clear about those, because otherwise, you're right. I mean, deterrence of humanism as a teaching philosophy would strongly argue against many roles that sometimes the so-called humanistic teachers take. But so one has to be clear about what is it that I'm doing as a, you know, a professional that embraces humanism in the practice, so that you're careful not to overdo it or start taking on roles that at the end of the day do not correspond to you and do not contribute to the, you know, teaching learning process. Yes.
Yeah. I have to bring that up because, you know, in the literature, that's one of the criticisms of the humanistic approach. Ayman has a question here, I think revisiting the use of Spanish by teacher educators, and he'd like to know the positive and negative in terms of teacher identity development, as you've seen from your research. Roy or Hania, either one? The use of Spanish in teacher education programs for EFL teachers, or even Natalia, since you've been in the classroom.
Yeah, well, Ayman is asking if the impact was positive or negative. I think that in Costa Rica, the use of Spanish in the classroom is frowned upon. Teachers are many times evaluated according to how much English or how much Spanish they use in the classroom. So I would say that the use of Spanish has a negative impact. As one of the students in Roy's research said, he or she was very motivated in his first class where the teacher only used English, but after the first class, the teacher started using Spanish and he got discouraged and was not motivated anymore. I think it has to do with the idea that Roy was talking about at the beginning of session, where being a country where Spanish is the first language and where students are looking forward to learning English, and the only environment where they have this contact with the language is the classroom, that is what they are expecting, an English speaking context, or an only English speaking context. However, I do agree that at some levels, we do need to include English. In one of the courses that I teach with Hazel, actually, in the past, not anymore, but we taught a leveling course for new students in the UCR, and we started using only English, and experience just told us that we were not getting much advantage of that we needed to give them a little push with the L1 in the classroom. So I don't know if Hazel, you want to add a little bit to that, maybe?
Yes, I have that experience with that class, with very true beginners, that they really needed that push and that confidence and comfort that Spanish, that is the first language, gave them. In my own research, I've also found that sometimes the neglection or the not including of the first language, in this case Spanish, because I've studied this population a little bit, becomes problematic because they start to see their own accent and the things that they do because of Spanish as flaws. And that definitely affects their identity formation processes, because they start having these insecurities and having self-doubt, for instance, and in general, very negative emotions towards anything or in everything that has to do with Spanish. Just because they've never used it in class, and because they have this idea, and also this is what is expected from them, what they expect from an English class, that it should be English only. So yeah, that's my perspective as an educator, but also as a researcher.
Yeah, I think what you said to us is that there can't be one blank approach, as to whether or not Spanish should be included as scaffold, or whether English, whatever percentage that is. There cannot be, a one size fits all approach. It's very contextualized and depending on students' needs as well. And I think that's something that we're very aware of in countries whereby English is not the first language. I'm from Malaysia, and so I'm very aware of what I know in terms of my scholarship, and what I know in terms of what's happening on the ground. And so, and in terms of my individual students, we're getting to sort of trying to wrap up this conversation, because it's an hour, and we could continue this forever. But what are the questions, Roy and Hania and Natalia, that I have not asked, or that we did not ask, that you feel is necessary for us to understand, if we are to think about English language teaching as a teacher educator in Costa Rica? Is there something that we've not brought up that's essential in your opinion? Roy, Hania, or Natalia? Or Hazel? Roy?
Yeah, well, you see, as you said, we could stay here hours and hours and talk about many issues and many realities and so on. But one thing that's important is that, there is a value, Costa Ricans value education, and Costa Ricans value speaking other languages, in this case, English. It's really important. And whomever you ask in the street would say, knowing about technology and speaking English is really important. And so this is really important to know for people in our profession, because that puts us a heavy burden upon our shoulders. There is a general belief, a general appreciation for the learning of English. We are the people in charge, in our case, of training future teachers. And so preparing these teachers to go and meet the expectations of all these people that want to learn English, it's a heavy responsibility. So that's why, most of us, take the teaching job professionally and seriously. and do not just teach language, but also worry about doing research, aiming at, becoming better educators and getting to know our population better. Because, we're good at reading. We lead a lot of, the leading research done elsewhere in the world, and by, the big cheeses of research and education and language teaching. But how do we apply that to our environment? How do we customize that? So that's important to us. And that's why we, undergo these small research endeavors that at the end of the day, give us a lot of insight on how we should conduct our teaching in our classrooms within our context.
Mm-hmm. Within your local context, yes. I mean, I think the idea of local, emphasizing the local, I think is what you just said, Roy, and it's so true. Importing anything from anywhere else doesn't make sense. But understanding the local, makes a whole lot of difference. Natalia or Hania, do you want to wrap up and say something that we should know that we've not talked about?
Well, it goes a little bit along the same lines. I just think that we need to know the place where we're teaching, the students that we have. We need to know where they come from, what are their unique ways of learning, what are the resources they use, what do they bring into the classroom before making decisions on how to teach. And just as Roy was saying, also, it's an ongoing process. Each time we have a new group in the classroom, we need to know that they are different from the one before that. Even if it's the same class, the group is always going to be different, and just take into account those unique ways the students have in order to make the decisions that we're going to use in the classroom, in English or in any subject, actually.
Yeah. Thank you. Hania, were you trying to jump in? Yeah, go ahead, Hania.
Okay. I was, when I was listening to you, I was thinking, and I am very proud because, for example, MEP now, the Ministry of Public Education now, tells us that the center of our educational process and the person is the person. And this person, this student, is the one who is going to be responsible for the transformation of the society. And it's very simple, but it is very hard to accomplish this. So our responsibility as teachers in Costa Rica is to make everything we can to let them stay in the system, because if they stay in the system, they're going to continue growing. So their life standards are going to be better, and they are also going to be better people, and better people make a better society.
Mm-hmm. That's a wonderful, wonderful way to end this session, whereby the focus is on the person. The student, and all teacher education is focused also on the teacher, the person of the teacher. It's a wonderful way to end this session and to remember this session by. And so with that, I want to thank you, Professor Roy Gamboa Mena. I want to thank you, Ms. Hania Morales. I want to thank you, Natalia Ramirez Casalvolone, for taking the time to share with us insider perspectives into teacher education and into teaching in Costa Rica. And thank you also to all our attendees on Zoom as well as on Facebook. Thank you very much, and we'll see you again. Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.